Pleased to be joined today by my colleague Oliver Schack, TICAS's Research Director, for an overview of our higher education data tool, College Insight. For over a decade, TICAS has run College Insight, a unique resource with higher education data for over 12,000 US colleges and universities with over 400 variables. Most recently, we have updated this tool with new features that we are excited to share with all of you today. Today, we will use College Insight to focus on California data specifically to compare institutions, combine data sets, and build custom tables and learn more about top issues facing college students. Before I turn it over to Oliver to walk us through these features, just a few housekeeping items. We will have a Q&A at the end of Oliver's presentation, so please feel free to enter questions into the chat box while he is presenting, and we will get to them at the Q&A, or feel free to raise your hand once we get to the Q&A itself. Everyone will be in mute mode throughout the presentation, but we will unmute you when it's your turn to ask your question. At the end of the presentation, we'd be very appreciative if you could please fill out a very short survey to let us know how we can provide you with the most informative programming. And we will be circulating the PowerPoint after the presentation in case it's helpful to review. I think that covers it. So without further ado, I am pleased to turn it over to Oliver.
Thank you, Laura. So as Laura said, I'm Oliver Schack. I'm the research director at TICAS, and it's so nice to meet all of you. I lead up the College Insight project, and I will say before beginning that I joined the TICAS team about 9 months ago, and I was really struck by all the useful tools and resources available through College Insight. I really wish I had been more aware of these resources in previous jobs that I've had. So I hope from today's tutorial that folks appreciate the usefulness of College Insight, and we can increase awareness. For today's tutorial, I'm going to start out with just a quick overview of what College Insight is. We'll have a nice video overview for you. Then I'll delve more deeply into what makes College Insights special. I'll talk a little bit about the data details as well as the functionality on the website. And then for most of our time, Laura and I will actually do a demo of College Insight. What is College Insight? College Insight is a web tool in which users can quickly access data about college affordability, student debt, as well as student outcomes and college access. This is a tool that we've had up for a little over a decade. We started in 2009, and we've done a few iterations of this project. Last year, we had a fairly substantial revamp of the website, really trying to make it more accessible and user-friendly for our wide audience. The audience we're really aiming to reach is a wide range. It includes students and families, but also more policy wonks, researchers, analysts, as well as advocates. So there's three main sections to the site. We have the Spotlight tool that's geared a little bit more towards consumers. There's Explore All Data, which is a little bit more advanced. We've also included some advanced search functions, and we added that in back in May of this year, and we'll touch on those during the demo. The one final thing I would note about College Insight is that typically we update the data at least once a year, and we typically do that in parallel to our release of the student debt report. The student debt report lifts up some key data points on College Insight, but also explores broader trends about college affordability and student debt. And now I'll play our our video. I hope you all enjoyed our snazzy video. There's also a link a few slides back to other demo videos we have on College Insight. Those explore the more specific features of the site. A little bit more about College Insight and really what is unique about the tools we offer. First of all, as I've noted before, it's just a very easy way to access concrete data related to affordability and student debt. Also, we pull in data from a wide range of sources, and that allows users to look at the relationships between variables that come from a variety of sources. I think the most important feature in my mind is actually the ability to pull data on lots of different levels of aggregation. For instance, you could pull data that summarize the national level, but also you could drill down specifically into a state like California, or even into individual institutions. A little bit more about the information we provide on College Insight. Our data covers really the full universe of US colleges and universities. It's about 12,000 institutions. And I would note that that includes institutions that are currently operating, as well as those that are closed or merged, but operated at some point over the time frame of our data. For California, that means that there's about 1,600 institutions total. About 700 of those operate right now. You can look up all kinds of totals and averages by states, sectors, other groupings of colleges. 400 plus variables from all the data sources we have. And generally, many of those variables pull back to the year 2000, and that enables users to analyze trends over a considerable period of time. For the data sources, we have lots of the kind of standard federal data sets like iPads. You can get student outcomes from College Scorecard. Federal student aid is particularly useful for more of a policy analyst perspective. It allows users to look at Pell disbursements, loan disbursements by institution. I would really highlight the common data set that's a feature that's quite distinct to College Insight. It's a proprietary data set that we purchased through Peterson's, and it allows users to see data and information about private student loans, institutional grants, state grants, how much grant money is awarded on the basis of need. And one really critical caveat that I will note about those data is that the common data set data are generally collected from public four-year institutions and nonprofit four-year institutions. And we pay a lot of attention to bachelor degree graduates and how much debt they graduate with. And so that's an important group, but it doesn't necessarily cover the full universe, such as community colleges. A little bit more about the three major sections of our site. We have the College Spotlight tool that allows users to look at all the major variables in one place for a single institution. It also allows for side-by-side comparisons between two institutions, or a comparison between an institution and institutions within, let's say, the same sector or a certain a grouping of institutions. That's particularly useful for students and families. We can move over to the Explore All Data tool. That's a little bit more advanced, and it allows users to create a custom table, really explore a set of variables of interest. You can look at the variables across time or for a particular set of institutions. Great for researchers. And then finally, there's the Browse Topics section, which includes a bunch of topic pages about student debt or higher education more broadly. It includes topics like net price, cost of attendance, but also topics like distance education and that relate to recent trends. And with that, I will switch over to our demo. Here we are on College Insight, and this is the top page of the site. You can see that we have the three sections of the site right at the top. We're going to start with the College Spotlight tool. And Laura has some research questions. So Laura, what's our first question for College Spotlight?
Thank you, Oliver. So as an East Bay resident, I'd love to learn more about the University of California at Berkeley and Cal State East Bay. Could you please show me, using the College Spotlight, how I could learn more about those two schools?
Great. So first, what we want to do is we want to look up our first institution. I'll do Berkeley first. There's two ways to do that. You can type it into this drop down here. But we also added this new feature last spring called narrow search. And what we can do is we can narrow down what's appearing in this drop down. And we can start with California, public, four-year. Now we have just the public four-year institutions, and we will find Berkeley. And there, now we have a bunch of information for Berkeley, and we want to compare to CSU East Bay. And I just want to point out, you can compare it to a few different things. You could do a quick compare, and that's a comparison to California public four-year institutions. Also, you can compare to data nationally, but we want to customize this, and I'll just type in East Bay, and there we go. And so now we've built this comparison, and I will scroll down and show a few things. So we have some data right at the top. We have the average amount of debt of bachelor degree graduates. And we can see it's roughly similar between the two institutions. Borrowing is a little bit more common at CSU East Bay than Berkeley. Also, just looking a little further down, we can see Powell. There's some differences there, a bit more low-income students at CSU East Bay. And just using that data point, I'll show that you can also visualize this by clicking on that chart icon. So just a different way of looking at the data. And if I close this affordability section, you can see we have lots of different other kinds of data, like postgraduate outcomes, completion, racial composition, enrollment. We can see what that looks like. Also, information about federal student aid. And you can download this profile and have it all in an Excel spreadsheet. So a lot of flexibility on format. The last thing I'll note is that you can change the year too if you want to see how the numbers look further back. So I think those are the basics around College Spotlight. Laura, where else to next?
Thank you, super helpful. So, I've been spending quite a bit of time looking into net prices. So what students have to pay out of pocket after available grants and scholarships. And I was wondering how I could use College Insight to delve more into that topic.
So we go to our browse topics, and you can see we have a bunch of different topics pages that cover many different areas around higher ed. But the net price page, that's actually one of my favorites. What it does is it gives us some information about how much students pay after scholarships and grants, and breaking that down by sector as well as income group. As I scroll down, we have a table and we have a chart. So two different ways of visualizing it. And basically what it shows is that higher income students tend to pay a bit more at institutions, but it's also important to keep in mind that although they pay more, lower income students are generally paying a higher share of their income. And we highlight that in some of our work. I'll scroll down a little bit more. We have, you can see that the net prices are a bit lower at public institutions. That's also consistent with research. And we have a little bit blurb about what the charts say. And then we have some of our reports, and we highlight some resources that we have at TICAS beyond College Insight about this topic. We have a report about the national landscape on affordability. And then we also have a report on net prices at public institutions within California. And you can see that included a nice map of the net prices across the state. I know Laura has worked quite a bit on the California net price map. So I wonder, Laura, if you have some key takeaways from that work.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to share them. So What College Costs for Low-Income Californians 2020 is the third iteration of our analysis of the out-of-pocket costs that low-income students at public colleges and universities across California face. For this analysis, we define low income as $30,000 and under, the annual family income group that includes the majority of Black, Latino, and Native American undergraduates, both nationally and in California. And we consistently find that despite lower tuition, community colleges tend to be more expensive than public four-year universities in California. This is in great part because total college costs, so including living expenses, transportation, books and supplies, et cetera, are much more similar across the different college segments. And it's also because California community college students receive disproportionately smaller grant awards. That said, net prices are high for low-income students at both public and, at public 2 and 4 year institutions across the state. In fact, at all 27 UC, CSU, and community colleges in our analysis, low-income students would have to work more than 15 to 20 hours a week to cover college costs after grant aid, which we know a wide body of research shows can be detrimental to student success. So this really underscores the importance of strengthening need-based financial aid in promoting college success and in closing persisting equity gaps.
Thank you for sharing. I definitely recommend checking out the work there. Really, it's a cornerstone of our California work. So we've covered 2 of the areas on College Insight, and we have explore all data remaining. And I'll get this started. Laura, what questions might users have for this tool?
Yeah, so how would I go about looking up the share of undergraduates receiving Pell Grants and also the average amount of Pell that they're receiving for students at public 2-year colleges, both in California and nationally?
All right, so similar to the Spotlight tool, where we want to start is to pick our rows or the institutions we're looking at. And I can do that here. I'll start with California. We pick California, and we also want to pick public 2-year. I'll save that row. And there's 2 ways we could add the national comparison. One way is I could just enter the information again down here in this drop down. Another shortcut we kind of added in our last iteration was this clone button. We can simply click this button and it copies the same information as California public 2 years, and we just need to adjust this now to national. So I click national, now we have national public 2 year. So it's useful if you're copying this very similar things over and over again. And now I will we set our rows, and now we set our years. I will click on 2017-18, which is generally the most recent. And we want Pell. The fastest way in this case, I'm just going to type Pell. And we want amounts to. So you all may have noticed that that there's missing data here, that it's NA. There's a few different reasons this may occur on the site. One may be that it may just not be applicable to the institutions we're looking up. An example that might be bachelor degree seeker graduation rates. That's not going to be applicable to community colleges, so that will show up as NA. In this case, Pell is definitely applicable to these institutions, but we simply have not yet refreshed the data for 2017-18. We're working to do that, and you can expect that this coming fall. But what we can do is we can look at older years of data. We have all the previous years of data still available for that. And I will change the years. Now I added 16, 17. And what you can see is that comparing the two, Pell is a little bit less common at public 2 years in California. That is pretty consistent with what research has shown. And so you can compare nationally. One other thing I would just show you is that, let's say we want to look across multiple years, I can just add a bunch more years, and we can see how that's trended over time. One thing that's kind of interesting that I'm noticing just looking at this is for both nationally and in California, there seems to be a little bit of a peak around 2014-15, and then it's trending downward a little bit. So that's an interesting trend in enrollment of low-income students in college. A few more basic features before we proceed to our next question. We can always add more rows. So let's say if I just wanted to add another state, I could do that. And there now we have Arizona. And I could also reorder the variables. If I had a ton of variables and I wanted certain ones to pop up first, we have a fairly large table now we could download into an Excel, and that allows for filtering and sorting. So those are kind of the very basic features of how to manipulate this table. I think we have another question. Laura, what's our next question?
Yeah, and one thing that I'll just quickly add too is that, it's really interesting when we see the results of the data that pop up, because sometimes there could also be multiple explanations as to why we're seeing differences. So we know, for example, in California that there's real efforts to improve the number of community college students who apply for the FAFSA. So when we see lower rates, it doesn't always necessarily mean that there are fewer lower income students. It could also mean that the rates of application. But in any case, always helpful to kind of dig into the whys, the potential whys of what we're seeing. So for the next question, I was wondering if I wanted to identify all public four-year colleges in California and their total enrollment by race and ethnicity. Would I need to download the entire data set and sort it, or is there another way to go about that?
That's a great question, and that's a more advanced question. What's great about these custom tables is that we can actually answer some of those questions quite quickly and easily without the full data set. There's a few ways you could do that. So one, which would take quite a bit longer, is you could manually enter each institution, and that assumes also that you know each institution. But we also added this common selections feature. And this is really one of the best improvements to the site recently. And this includes kind of a pre-populated lists of institutions and aggregates that users might want to populate quickly. When we look over this national section, you can populate all the different sectors and levels, or you could look at all the averages or aggregates across 50 states plus DC. In this case, what we're interested in is our public four-year institutions in California. So we would scroll down to this section, state and institutional. We would select California in the dropdown. We have some options here about sector breakdowns. But we would go down to the filter by institution type. And we have two options. We could actually compare across public 4 years, across all the 50 states in DC. But the other option we have is to view information on all public 4-year institutions in California. And I selected that, and we have this full list of public 4-year institutions. And I proceed down here. I will select 1617. And there's a few different ways we can look up race ethnicity. One is that those are fairly common variables, and we have the three major categories: Black, Latino, white, down here in the frequently used. If I close that up, there's also a section about race ethnicity, and this has more detailed variables, and we could explore that. But my favorite feature here is the search feature, which we recently added. And so I could just type in Black, and maybe I'll type in Hispan, and that gives us both Latino and white. And now we have all those data populated for public four-year institutions in California, and we can see the composition. Again, I would remind folks that you can download this table, and you might want to do that, and then you can sort and kind of see much more clearly the patterns. You can add more variables with the edit variables, and a few more features on this tool that I want to highlight. One is that you always have the full data set down here. So if you have an even more complex question, you can download the data set and explore that way as well. That includes data documentation, the full code book too. And then this share button, that allows users to share on social media or to share via email. And what I really like about this is that the email option, it will give you a URL, and that link will actually go specifically to this table. It's a great way to save the work you've done. I think that's about everything I have. Laura, anything else before I turn back to our PowerPoint?
No, I think it would be great to see if there's any other points you have, and then we can, after that, go to Q&A. But thank you. This is incredibly helpful.
Great. All right. I'll switch back. All right. So I have just a few more points I want to make about College Insight. We do have some next steps for the project. We have our regular annual update, and we'll refresh all the data that will be in parallel with our student debt report. We plan to provide some context in the report around COVID-19 and kind of the broader trends around student debt, where we could head from here. So keep an eye out for that. One other thing I want to highlight about College Insight, we have a number of different ideas about ways we can further improve the site, and I welcome feedback. But one thing we do plan to move forward on is at least one topics page related to California. And so we're thinking about what kind of topics we could highlight there to freshen things up. And if you're curious about where all the links are for all of our resources, this slide includes a number of different links to data documentation, to our landing page, which includes the tutorial videos, and then the student debt report as well. You can contact us through this email. This email actually goes directly to me, so I encourage you to use it if you see any bugs or any input on ways we can improve College Insight, or if you have any ideas about how to partner or increase awareness about the site as well, that is welcome too. And that's, with that, I'll turn it over for questions. And Laura, I'll lead the way on that.
Terrific. Well, thank you again, Oliver. This is very, very helpful to see all the different features of College Insight. And I just wanted to turn it over to participants. I'm not seeing any questions in the queue, so I'm not sure if that means that folks were waiting until the Oliver had concluded, or if that means people don't have any questions. I'll just reiterate what Oliver was saying is please always feel free to reach out to us at any point if you have any questions. But I'll wait a moment to see if anyone wants to raise their hand or type a question into the chat feature. And actually, while we're waiting to see if anyone wants to ask anything, I do have one other question, Oliver. So, for a student who lives in San Francisco and let's say they're curious about, they just graduated from high school, they're curious about success rates at nearby colleges, how might they go about looking at bachelor's degree graduation rates? So like, for example, how could I, at like SF State, Cal State East Bay, University of San Francisco, how might I look up graduation rates at those schools?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a scenario that could come up, and there's a few ways you could go about it. One is the Spotlight tool, as I said, allows easy comparison for two institutions side by side. In the scenario you outlined, it's more than one institution of interest, perhaps in like a region that the student is exploring. And so the student could go to the Explore Data tool. That would probably be the easiest way. And the student could look up each of those institutions, creating the rows. They would just type in the name. They'd work their way through, and then when they get to the variables, they would want to, I think they could just type in the search variables like graduation rate. They could look up the overall rate, and there's also the breakdown by Pell and non-Pell students. So yeah, that's a useful feature definitely for consumers.
Awesome, thank you. And I do see a question from our friend Leanne. Is there national student clearinghouse data in our tool?
It's a good question. I'd welcome feedback on that. We, in fact, do not have National Student Clearinghouse data. Those do include perhaps more complete measures around completion. That's often where folks go for that. It is another proprietary data set that we would have to pay for, but I definitely welcome that input if there are cases where that data would be useful.
Great. So yes, Leanne and anyone else, please feel free upon further thought if you want to shoot Oliver an email on that. I see another question from Jose. Can you share a bit more of how you will be incorporating the COVID-19 context into the tool?
Yes, just to clarify, we're going to provide some context in our student debt report. That's generally where we provide that kind of additional context. The tool will really lift up the available data as they are, and the most recent data we're going to have from the common data set, that's going to be class of 2019 and those graduates, and that is still actually quite useful from the perspective of the COVID-19 crisis, because these are the students who are left to repay loans during a public health crisis as well as economic downturn, and those are definitely some themes that we're going to explore in our report. So to that extent, we'll be highlighting COVID-19.
Thank you. I know we just have just a couple minutes left, so just pausing to see if folks has any other questions they want to pose for Oliver. But of course, it's not one and done, so if you think of anything later, please always feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to help with your data analyses. Oliver, is there anything else you can think of at this point that would be helpful to share? I know you've gone over a whole bunch of stuff, so perhaps not.
Not so much. One question we do get quite a bit, just about the technical specifics around the data. The private student loan data that we receive from Peterson's, we include those data for institutions that report and have that information available. It's not 100% of all institutions. And just if you're curious, it covers about 70% of all bachelor degrees awarded in the US. So a pretty good, enough coverage to get a sense of where the trends are. But I think that is another important caveat people are sometimes curious about. Other than that, it's really been a pleasure, and I really thank everybody for joining us for this tutorial.
Well, thank you so much, Oliver, for walking us through this. And we want to thank all of our participants for joining us today. We really appreciate it and hope that you found the presentation helpful and informative. As you leave, you'll be redirected to a short survey with, I believe, just 4 questions on which we'd really appreciate your feedback for future programming. And as always, we are here to talk through any data questions you may have, so please don't hesitate to reach out at any point. Take care and have a great weekend. Thank you all so much.